Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by CoolStuffInc.com, Mana Traders, as well as Twitch subs and Patreon supporters just like yourself. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Power Dragon.
What's up, everybody?
I promise I'm going to get those new graphics as soon as I can. Ruben Presser.
Good evening. How's it going?
You're working with what we got. That's what we're doing here. So if you missed our pre-show, patrons and subs to this channel get access to all that good content early, where we talk all about movies and Marvel Snap and other Snap stuff that we're doing. I even get to throw in some CSBS in there, even though it's the off season. That's right. And we kick it off with the first pick and the giveaway. Get your chance at $50 worth of anything at CoolStuffInc.com by typing ! Raffle in the chat, but sub first to get 2 chances to win, and support your favorite streamer with your suggestions at the end of the show to see who we raid tonight. Thanks to our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, and you can find cool stuff in stock every day. And the first pick is pretty obvious. If you've paid attention to anybody who plays constructed Magic, and particularly there's some Twitter accounts that do, and if you look in the Magic Online deck list that have access to Modern and Legacy and all that other good stuff, the One Ring is insane. The One Ring, I guess we could say busted or broken or whatever magical word you want to use for overpowered, but it is it is overpowered basically everything. I've seen it in every kind of deck. I've seen it in combo decks or Amulet Titans. I've seen it in White Weenie decks where it's just a 4-mana spell in the White Weenie deck because it's the best thing you can do. I've seen it replace Jace the Mind Sculptor out of really powerful, crazy, good decks. I've seen it run over formats, and we're not even talking about Orcish bowmasters. We're just talking about the One Ring. It's just the best thing you can do. And if you play Alchemy, like I unfortunately do from time to time, I can tell you, you're either playing 4 One Rings or you better be playing against them. It's worse than Sholdred. The card is bananas.
Wow.
Yeah, the card is fantastic. It works in so many decks. It combos with a bunch of different things. Mm-hmm. It's indestructible. Like, you just not being able to be targeted just is problematic and turn stuff off. Like, there's no part of that card is even medium. Like, that's the thing. Like, it does effectively 3 things, and they're all great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the lists here. And it makes, I look at the types of lists that it's in, and some of them make sense, right? I see it in a Martyr Gain Life deck. Awesome. I totally get it in a Martyr Gain Life deck.
Sure. Mystic
Forge. Awesome. Anything Urza related. Totally cool. Oath of Druids. I get it there. I even get it there. But if it's showing up in Court of Calling toolbox decks that are 30 creatures... I don't necessarily want a card. This reminds me of Ragavan, when Ragavan first came out, and it just got shoved in everything, right? Yeah. Didn't need to have any or Tarmogoyf, when Tarmogoyf became the new hotness, and that was just like in affinity decks, right? It was just like, this makes no sense here, but the card is so good you can't not play it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's still going to be, talking about Tarmogoyf, a lot of times it was still a 4/5 anyway. For 2 mana.
Exactly. So looking at some of these decks, and I'm just like, I don't know if I want a 4-cost artifact in some of these
But
decks.
have you played with it? Good. Because it's amazing. Now,
I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying maybe there's a problem.
Look, there's certain moments as a Magic player that I remember very clearly. And I remember very clearly the first time in a pre-release I got to play against Smuggler's Copter. And I was like, this card is absolutely insane. And it's bananas. And I love it because it's bananas. I like broken stuff. And the moment I saw someone point out that the second ring resets the ring and gives you another round of protection from everything, that was it. The bells went off. And I was like, oh God, this is everything everywhere all at once. And this is going in every deck that can play it. This is going in 4-ofs in every deck that can play it. And I don't think it is in Wizards' best interest to ban this card at all. It's just really, you don't want that to be some weird narrative of, oops, they made it too good. So what I had proposed just before the cast here was the idea that you restrict the One Ring to 1 copy in every constructed format, because it's crazy thematic. It's already a vintage precedent. It won't damage the value of the card. That's a huge one. This is a $60 mythic right now. You don't want it to tear that down, but you also don't want it to just run every format forever, and it will still get to see lots of play. And because you can only play one of them, it might be in your opening hand, or you might not see it over 3 games. It's just, so what's going to happen when you only get one of them? But it'll be really cool when you do. It'll be super powerful and interesting, and it'll still be a part of the format you have to be prepared for. But I think it solves a lot of the problems in that it's still great, it's still good, but it's not going to be stupid.
And literally getting played in every format where it's legal, including Commander. Like, it is everywhere right now.
It's been a minute, and I don't hate this argument. However, for a couple of reasons, I do want to ask, Evan, do we have the red zone overlay prepared?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to red zone this because I think I'm okay with your argument. I agree with a lot of the points you've made.
Sure.
Restricting cards in non-vintage formats is a Rubicon we've never passed and will never pass. It will not happen.
That's not true. We had restricted stuff back in the day in Type 2.
Okay,
you can only play
all right,
one
Granddad.
Orb. You
That's
can only
not,
play one
I'm not,
balance. You can only play one strip mine.
Not
don't
going
tell old man Magic what happened and what's never happened.
You've got to play 5
wrong.
cards from Homelands in your deck.
Exactly. They've done everything weird that they could possibly do.
Let's stick to the last 20 years of Magic.
So you can be right. Okay.
Yeah, let's stick to since Google was invented. All right. I think that
is a funny measuring stick, but accurate.
Right? You don't want to introduce restricted to Magic because for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
And you have to pretend you know nothing. Pretend that you are a new Magic player and you want to go play in a constructed format.
Sure.
All you know is you can play 4 of any card that isn't basic lands.
Sure. Unless
it says it on the card.
Unless it's banned.
Unless it's banned, then there's a ban list, and you can, the judges will have a ban list. But if they also have to have a specific rule for your tournament for one card, we're getting dangerously close to what they did to the companion mechanic, which I think is what we're discussing here, right? We're discussing
doing something unprecedented,
post-printing errata to a card, and that is what they did to the companions. Is they changed what the rules text said. So
I mean, we've updated text on cards before. We even had that situation where, like, cards got banned, but they were still in a pre-con, and you were still
it's close to that. It's close
so we've had some weird things happen that weren't hard for people to really comprehend.
Like, if the ban list goes to the banned and restricted list, and the restricted list has one card on it, I think that's fine. And I don't want... The other thing is, there's been a lot of people pay lots of money for their One Rings. I don't want them to all be worthless overnight, and that can definitely happen if they ban it.
For sure. Right. And I love the idea. I wish the card were printed that way. And I think that it would make a lot of sense to have printed the One Ring to say you may only have one copy of the One Ring in your deck.
I think that would have been a brilliant idea, but I also understand...
I don't hate your idea.
Right.
This is just...
just sort of talking it through. And
creature type devil's advocate.
Sure. And, I also understand that they wouldn't want to put something on the card that made it, seem negative, you know what I'm saying? Even though it's not negative, it's powerful enough to warrant it, it also would just come off as negative.
I don't even know if that's negative as much as it would have been flavorful.
Right.
I think people would have... It's the same reason if we do restrict it, I'm kind of okay with it, with this being the one that gets restricted. Being the One Ring, right? I think that's okay. It's a weird spot. I agree with you. But if there's a card we get to do it with, might as well be this one.
Yeah, I agree. And, we said a couple months ago, before we knew what the One Ring did and before the set was released and before we had any of this confirmation bias about any of, if the card is good or not, we said, if there's going to be a best card in the Lord of the Rings set that is going to break everything, it should be the One Ring. It shouldn't be Bill the Pony, right? I love, I love Rosie Cotton, right? I love these side characters, but great. I don't want Stu the Conies to be the card that breaks vintage. I want the One Ring to be the Lord of the Rings card that does it. I want Jace the Mind Sculptor to be the best card. I want, these legendary crazy things to be the best thing. And it's nice when that happens. How do you make something the best thing without making it too good? I mean, it's also still early, right? Give the format time to develop. Give the formats time to develop. Give it a little bit of a leeway just because right now Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring and some of these Lord of the Rings cards are everywhere, doesn't mean they'll be everywhere forever once the shiny wears off of them and they sit in a desk for 70 years until someone finds them in an envelope.
Now, I don't expect them. Now, again, I would love for this to happen. Obviously, it's my idea, duh. But, I also agree that if we were not having this conversation, we would be talking about Orcish Bowmasters.
For sure.
That is just kind of winning everything it can go in. And it's a 4 of and everything, like a $30 rare, which is also kind of insane. Particularly right off the bat, as the set just got released. But you see it doing stupid things in the older formats. Please brainstorm. I beg you to brainstorm, is what you just do these days. You know that it killed the Dark Confidant. Why? Because it can. It just does that. Like, the fact that it amasses in the battlefield and not just the other trigger is just so crazy. It's just a bump on everything you're already doing. It's amazing.
I mean, yeah. The fact that it amasses, it could have any one of the 4 abilities that it has, and it would be a good card. It could enter the battlefield and deal a damage, and it'd be a fine card.
Right.
It could amass when it entered the battlefield. It'd be okay. It'd be
Right.
fine. It'd be two 1/1s for 2. It could deal a damage when it entered the battlefield. It could deal a damage when you amass or whenever someone draws a card. It has all 4 for 2 mana. It's insane. And you combine that with a wheel effect in Commander, and that's where people are really afraid of the card.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you go Bowmasters after somebody wheels, that's just a 30/30 and 30 triggers.
Here's what's really crazy. I was like, when they first got previewed, I was having a discussion with people, and they were trying to argue with me that the bats were scarier than the bowmen.
Sure.
And I was like, 2 and 4 mana is a light year of difference, and this one has flash, and it has a ridiculous upside. Like, don't get me wrong, the bats are cute, and they will occasionally win some games because they'll do some fun things, but they are not the Orcish Bowmasters.
It's just wild to me that, again, just like sort of if Bill the Pony was the other insane card, this is just as much as random as the Orcish Bowmasters being the other best card in the set.
That's the other thing. Why was this not, I don't know, Legolas or something? Well, I guess you couldn't amass or whatever.
Or the legendary orc that bombs Helm's Deep.
Yeah, something.
Like, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Something, but either way, but or just a main character, it just feels very Dr. Light. You know what I mean? They made an X-Men set.
Oh, absolutely.
The best character was Dr. Light. Like, why wasn't the best character Wolverine or Cyclops or something? But nope. Mm-hmm. And we just have Orcish Bowmasters again. If the One Ring was just put aside, it would be all Bowmasters talk right now. But instead, the Ring is even better than that. And so that's
they're
what
good
we're talking
together in the same deck.
And they're
I
amazing.
don't even know why
together.
the Bowmaster just costs 2. I think that's the other thing I'm still dumbfounded by. Like, if that was, even if it was like 2 black, I'd at least be like, okay, you're at least aware something could happen here. Right. But like, just a black and a colorless is so weird for this card, as good as it is.
It is still recent. Both of those cards are great. Like, there's no argument that both of those cards are going to be players in multiple formats for a long time.
Right.
Do I think that they are going to be top 10 most played cards in every format forever? No.
Oh, yeah,
I don't think the One Ring is going to... I would wager that when all is said and done, the One Ring will be about as played as Jace the Mind Sculptor was. Which is to say, still probably the most played 4-drop.
That's still a lot, yeah.
Still a lot.
But it's not going to be the astronomical absurd levels that it is right now.
Here's another question. Is the Bowmaster's long-term viability tied to the One Ring?
I don't think so, because drawing cards is always going to be powerful, right? And anything that lets you do that.
But I mean, like, it does even more when the One Ring is popular.
That's true.
It can be better because of that, yeah.
But if we go back to Jace's, we're never getting rid of Brainstorm, right? Like, we're still going to be playing Ancestral Recall and Wheel of Fortune in Vintage and Commander. So, drawing a card never goes out of style, which means the Bowmasters are always going to be at least fine.
Like, the fact that Turn 1 Mishra's Workshop mocks One Ring, you can do that. That exists right now. Like, it's one of those, I hate to say anything too upfront because I've been down the hyperbole train and it don't always lead to good places. But I've also seen cards that are generic, can be in any deck, can rock every format, are super crazy powerful. Yes, they might get passed by at some point, but definitely feels like there's going to be a lot of vintage decks in the future that's going to start with 1/1 ring and the power 9 or the power 8 or whatever they're using of it, because that's just where you start, because it's the best thing you can do with the mana cost for generic mana cost. It's almost like the
it is
Karn
also
problem.
colorless, so
Right,
it goes into a lot of things. I mean, that does matter too.
Right.
Yeah, and that Orcish Bowmasters is not a name of a card that you have to rename to put in a future expansion.
Yep.
The One Ring is.
Yeah.
So that's another issue, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
I mean, I can definitely see the One Ring becoming $100 card, or higher. It's going to feel like it's restricted once they reach what is probably, just based on the arena stuff that they said at the end of 2025, you can't buy packs anymore. Arguably, that's when it's going to go out of print. It's at the end of 2025. And then there's going to be a line that just goes up for perpetuity, because I really doubt they're going to get the license again. They'll have to do something weird. They'll make us, an in-universe something or other maybe, but it'll probably have to get to stupid levels before they do that.
Well, that's something else we talked about over the weekend, is that as you start finding cards that do have use out of the set, if any of them are important places or named characters, or even the rare lands or whatever, some of those will probably end up continuing to be played.
Right.
Like, where do those eventually get reprinted? Because we've done in-universe reprints, but they've been for groups of like 6 or 8 or whatever. Like, we haven't done it for 30 cards.
Right.
And if you don't have the license, you can't put them in commander decks. You can't put them in whatever. I guess we have commander masters coming soon. Like, there's no spot for those. Like, so is this just a pile of cards that just continually get more valuable as the days go on?
The one shining light here before we move on is that the One Ring is in bundles. They are in the bundle product as you get one of them. And I would highly suggest anyone listening who wants a copy of this card, that is the best, easiest, and cheapest way to do so, because you also get like packs and stuff. You get a whole bunch of stuff. You get a One Ring and a bunch of other stuff, which is great. But, and there's also a weird thing that came up that there's certain cards that are an extended foil and extended art only in the collector sample packs.
Yeah.
You hear this? This was weird. There's
What
a
is-
whole list of cards that can only be found in collector sample packs.
Well,
What is
there's
a
also some that
collector's-
can only be found in, I think there's 2 or 3 that only come in foil in one pack, like maybe in just the collector boosters or something, but you can't get it elsewhere. Like, there's some weird things that happen with the printing on this one, and I don't know if it was because the number of cards that go on each sheet or whatever, but
The
it's
collector,
very awkward.
right? The
Very
collector
awkward.
booster sample pack comes in commander decks. It has like 3 cards in it.
Oh,
And,
it comes in the commander deck, and it's
Yes.
an example pack, or it's a
It's a
it's
taste.
an example pack
Right. It's
in
got a
a
rare in it.
commander. That's weird.
It's very weird. It's really crazy weird. And
Wow.
particularly the foil ones, which are even harder to pull. And so, like, there's definitely conversations of, should we crack commander decks for these
Right.
sample packs to sell? Because
Yeah.
it's got stuff you can't find anywhere else, which is
Mhm.
really weird.
Mm.
But we'll see what happens. Again, I was not expecting the One Ring to take over like it has, but at the same time, I'm not surprised, right? So
I'm of two minds about it. I think that I'm not surprised that the One Ring is the best card in the Lord of the Rings set. I would have been disappointed if it wasn't.
fair.
I am a little surprised at that it is so played in so many formats already.
Mhm.
Vintage, I get. Vintage is Mishra's Workshop, fast mana, a format where you want to be refilling your hand because you have so many Moxen in your deck. Like that, I get it there. Is surprising more to see it played in these odd locations in formats like Modern and Legacy, where card quality tends to be more valued than card amount, right? Like Force of Will is still a powerhouse in Legacy because there's just not as much card draw, raw card draw in Legacy. That used to be like much worse than it is. We now have things like, Minsk and Boo, and Jace and other sorts of card advantage recouping, and the initiative and things like that. But I would have thought that Seasoned Dungeoneer and Minsk and Boo would have been the One Ring in their decks, and this would have just been another thing like that. The fact that it's everywhere, the fact that it's in a Court of Calling toolbox deck, kind of blows my mind.
The white
The
weenie
fact
deck
that
blew
it's-
my mind. I was
The
like,
white weenie deck is
"You
another
wanted
one where you
that
go
white weenie?
1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, draw a card. Like, cool, awesome.
Not just draw a card, but like you get protection from everything for a turn.
It's also Teferi's protection for or not Teferi's protection, but it's protection for the turn, so you can't get back swung. It's really good in the mirror.
Right.
And it digs you out if you get wrathed or whatever. So like it makes sense. It just is surprising.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on here to gather the townsfolk. They announced here for the Barcelona event, the MagicCon Barcelona event, due to the popularity of the MC Vegas $100,000 limited open event, they're adding a $75,000 limited open event to the ticket to play offerings there, which I thought was super rad. Now, a couple of things here. One, as I mentioned last week, both can be true. If they sell out, they can make money, and they can, and if they don't, they still cost a lot to make the event happen. But one of the things that was weird to me is that the numbers are a little strange. So right now, the conversion to dollars to pounds is 1.26. So 1.26 pounds per dollar. So it's 135 pounds to enter. Max attendance of 1,200. That'd bring in $204,000. Your entry adjusted is $170.10. So to be clear, this is a more expensive event with a smaller prize pool.
Right.
Which is a thing. Now,
yeah.
Again, space is very expensive everywhere. I'm not saying, and I'm not discounting any of that. Again, we know stuff costs money. Stuff is not cheap, and both can be true. They can make money if this thing sells out. High five. They can also, there's a risk of you're putting up $75K and you're going to make sure you're going to pay that out, yada, yada. So that said, I thought it was super interesting that I think people do like big events that are for big money, but it's crazy to me to have the same kind of event, but worse.
Yeah, I'm wondering if on some level they're not sure it's going to sell out. Like I would think it's going to, just in the current state of Magic and the Magic cons and not having a big event over there and forever. But maybe that's the logic of like, okay, let's say we get only 700 entries, which is still a huge tournament.
Still a large event, yes.
Yeah, so you get 700 entries. Like, are they trying to hedge their bets a little bit? This is kind of why when we talked about it last time, I said if there was like up to a certain point and then we just add to the overlay or something after, let's say after 750 attendees, now like X percentage of X, every entry goes into pool, maybe 50% or whatever goes into the prize pool. Like that would be more enticing at those numbers, and they would still make a giant pile of money.
Yeah. I was also going to start using poker analogies here, where, you're allowed to have a tournament that, you're allowed to do this, right? You're allowed to have a tournament that costs more and gives away less.
It's fine. I understand everything, why this exists.
And just like in poker, you have higher, minimum payouts. You have higher, entry fees. Not everything is going to be exactly the same percentage of value for every tournament you ever enter. However, I definitely agree that an overlay, like you said, where once you reach the minimum threshold, you have the guaranteed payout, right? You have a 75K guaranteed, and then over top of that, you have the rest. Right. You get some extra cheese on top of that goes into the payout. And they kind of used to do that with Grand Prix, where they said, when you reach this number, we give out this much. When you reach this number, we give out this much. They used to have those tiers.
But as you recall, why did those tiers exist? Remember, like the numbers for GP started getting stupid.
Yeah,
900 people to 1,000 people for 10K, which just started seeming weird after a while.
For sure.
So they implemented that system, that sort of tiered system, and that's been gone for so long now. It almost feels archaic, but you're like, hey, I think these events are cool, but what if we can make it a $200,000 event if it sells out or whatever, or gets above a threshold? Let's go.
I wonder how players would feel if they did it just like poker, where, maybe there's the minimum guarantee or whatever, or some of them don't even have that, but you just have so much VIG taken off each entry, where it's just, if it's $200, 30 or 40 of it just goes to the house. The rest goes into the player pool or whatever. The way
a poker tournament works is that there isn't a set number for first place. There's a percentage of the total pool that goes to first place. Is that more attractive? Is that too much like gambling? Is that, where...
Gotta be careful with the G word.
Where's the line here?
Yeah. I think it's a cultural thing too, though, between the communities, right? Because it's... poker has always been that way, and I think for Magic players, not knowing what that guaranteed number is, you'd have a bunch of people probably standing around at entry going, well, it looks like they've got like 300 and there's like 30 of us that want to play, so like maybe it's worth it, whatever, as opposed to, I know first place is going to be at least $20,000 or whatever it is, right? Like, so that's part of it too. I mean, it's a weird balance of marketing and figuring out how would you even shift the culture, or if Wizards even needs to or wants to. That's
before you know it, we're back at GP Best Buy and we're getting PS4s
exactly.
and PS5s as our prizes, and they'll add an extra PS5 if 50 more people sign up. It's something weird.
It would be interesting.
Hey, at least it's not 6,500 people or whatever that was in Vegas at one time.
Right.
Yeah,
well, that one time, that like 4 times.
Well, that's true. That's true.
But the one time for sure.
I'm also gonna rub your nose in it a little bit. That it's a limited event that's super popular. Interesting. Well, I guess that's meaningless, but we'll move on.
This about limited Pro Tours or something? I don't know.
No, this was last week. You said that you didn't want it to be a limited event in Vegas.
Oh, I mean, I would love to see both options, catered to be honest.
That's true.
Either way, let's go ahead and move on here to something wonderfully positive, which that was not necessarily negative, but this is all great. And that is celebrating the fact that one Mr. Rosewater was inducted into the Academy of Adventure Gaming Arts and Design Hall of Fame. That was super cool. Congrats to him.
Very cool. So the Origins Game Fair is a legendary name in gaming events. Held in Columbus, Ohio, where I hail from. This is my home event. The first Magic tournament I ever went to. 12-year-old Ruben Bressler went down to the Greater Columbus Convention Center to go to Origins Game Fair. And I got my Birds of Paradise signed by Mark Poole. And so this is a big name. This is a big deal. And honestly, it's a little overdue, I think, to have Mark Rosewater in this, huge company. But it is... deserved regardless of whether or not it is overdue or not. So
from the better late than never, right? I'll take it.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, right? And the one thing I would say is there's a lot of people involved that probably also deserve some space, but Rosewater is by far the most visible, the most active. And I mean, you're talking about a game that's got 30 years of history, changed the entire landscape of hobby gaming, really. I mean, top to bottom. So yeah, like totally deserving.
And the fact he was in charge of the design of it for the past 23 years or so, something like that.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. But yeah, Rosewater is an absolute phenomenon.
He's had a Hall of Fame career, no matter how you slice it. The fact that he gets in the Hall of Fame is not a surprise, but it is great.
It is wonderful, and congratulations to him. Well deserved. Moving on, something that just gave me those 2010 vibes of CFB announcing that all of their content is now going to be free. There is no more CFBPro / paywall in front of stuff. And we've been talking about this in the pre-show for the past couple of weeks, of where it feels like there's not that build-up for a Chapin article on Monday, or a Flores article on Friday moving into the weekend for the tournament, or a Sam Black article on a Tuesday or whenever he was published, stuff like that, where you were like, oh man, this person is going to be writing their new stuff, and I can't wait to read it. Not to say that I don't want to still read all the CFB stuff, but it feels like we've definitely taken the sort of tent pole of this person is making new content and just kind of shifted it. And we talked, Ruben, you mentioned there's the Patreon / Discord community building around each person or a group of people, or there's just websites that provide it for free at this point, and you can indulge in whatever you want. And there's a hell of a lot more casual content than there ever was before.
I mean, there's a lot of things.
I feel like now, if you're going to do something like that for any type of paywalled stuff, you have to be offering more than the articles as the main attraction. Whether it's some type of special pricing or tournament or discounts or whatever, right? You have to have something more. And if the articles are the main draw, they probably weren't just getting enough people to pay for it to make it worth the maintenance and everything else.
Right. So
yeah, I think that there's a number of facets that have led to this most recent thing that has happened in the fact that Magic writing as an art form isn't the premier way to release content anymore. Article writing in Magic, once upon a time, and for a very long time, since the advent of the dojo, then the creation of TCG Player and Star City Games and Channel Fireball and Cool Stuff and all of these outlets, it is no longer the king of the hill anymore. And part of it is because article writing in general is not a thing in culture as popular as it used to be. I mean, we've been joking about newspapers and magazines going away. Well, part of that is going to also be word-based places to get information, and that includes Magic strategy sites. Then there's also, during the pandemic, a lot of shifts and changes to business practices happened, and a lot of shifts and changes to people's habits happened. Changes to people's habits changed, and all of that is also part of this evolution here. It is sad, as someone who was in the building at Star City Games. I was at TCG Player for a little, or not TCG Player. I was at TCG, not at, but writing for TCG Player for a minute before that. And then, I've been writing and making Magic content for more than a decade. I have 1,000 articles. I just looked it up. I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,200 Magic articles published online across my career. And that's not a career path anymore, really. It's moved to the Patreon model, which a lot of things have moved to the Patreon model, not just writing. Creation of most kinds have moved to the small business, come to my shop and pay me for my goods, rather than the collaboration of being at one hub like Star City Games. So there's a number of evolutions there.
I would stand up for there's still goodness in text-based content, and it's still worth your marketing dollars as a marketer for a website, that makes content and pushes it out there. I've ran the numbers. It's still good.
Oh, for sure.
It's not that it's bad. It's just that it's different, right? And
it's not
the
as
focus is so different,
right.
And the whole idea of like the writing star, and also the idea that essentially there's definitely a ceiling now that I really feel that content is worth. And before, that ceiling can go really high, like super duper high. You can get really well paid for writing articles with no paywall. That ceiling is going to be pretty much low continuously. And there will be points where you can definitely make money writing articles about Magic. You will not be able to make a career. You won't be able to feed a family. You'll probably be able to pay, like a car payment and stuff. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
That's
but
where
it's
you're
a good
at.
side hustle, for sure.
Side hustle.
I think to Ruben's point, though, the habits changed to how we interact with that, right? Because when everybody was doing weekly tournaments and everybody was on the PTQ grind and all that, I think you were really looking forward to, like, I don't know, the next secret tech article or whatever, or the deep dive on whatever the hot deck was of the minute.
Right.
But then during the pandemic, when those events weren't happening, the reason people went to articles changed. And now they still exist, but articles have to be written more about like large topical things, almost more than deep diving into individual decks, or philosophical stuff on formats and things like that,
right?
Which are still appealing and people still read them, but I think it's a different usage from the audience than what it used to be.
There's also been the evolution on how players receive information and how often they play because of Magic Arena. Now, in order to get the most recent tech, you don't need to read the article. You just play Arena.
And there's
you
tools
can watch my videos every day on YouTube.
Also that.
You can check out Power Dragon's fantastic YouTube videos. I guess I think here's a good way to put it in context for those of us who've been around for a minute. I don't expect there to be a Splinter Twin article like Chapin wrote, which kind of just broke the format and changed everything. I expect that to show up on an Aspiring Spike stream, or maybe Goldfish was trying something, or Jim Davis ran it out, or Power Dragon has a great video explaining some weird interaction that might be super powerful and ends up being unbelievably powerful. But the idea that it's kind of called by these high-tier authors that can kind of look into the future or see what's going to happen, it just doesn't feel like we're there anymore,
Yeah, you're more likely to find whatever the next, like, who's the beatdown is, more than a Splinter Twin being broken in an article.
Yep, and that's about as good as you can hope for, to be honest. Let's move on here to a fantastic note from LSV. Made things official with a ring and error thing with Gaby Spartz. Super cool. Congratulations to the newlyweds.
Which is wild because I thought they already were
Right.
Like I felt kind of bad. Like I was like, oh, I thought this was already a thing.
Yeah, we thought
okay,
you were
right.
already, and it's fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's a high
Oh, yeah.
five. I love it. But you know, never a bad time when people are getting married. Always fun and exciting.
Good thing to celebrate.
I've had limited interactions with both of them, but they've always been great every time.
Yeah, super kind and patient people for how in the public eye they are. For sure.
Exactly. All right, so let's move on here to some desperate ravings, and we'll get started off with a barn burner here. There was a post brought up by Mr. Rosewater, and he talked a lot about Typal on Twitter, and a lot of chitter chatter about Typal, and Typal being the replacement for Tribal, and Tribal being Goblin decks and Elf decks and so on. There used to be a card type named Tribal, which they used very sparingly and got away from almost immediately. They noted that they used this term internally. It's not going to be on cards anyway. This reminded me a lot of man lands versus creature lands, in which no one's trying to be exclusionary. As far as I can tell, no one's trying to hurt anybody's feelings. And I've certainly heard both sides of this, where there's Native Americans who say this feels like erasure because they're not using the tribal word anymore. And there's others who feel like they're offended by it and it's hurtful. And again, the fact that this is internal just means like you'll see it in articles and stuff and there'll be some slang. But, again, the idea of just like trying to like stand up for this group or stand up for the other side, I'm just in the middle going like, I just not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't know what's going on. I'm just a guy. Dude.
It's a nuanced topic, and we have this discussion often when words are concerned, because words mean things,
right.
Whether we intend them to mean them or not. And this applies to the word tribe, which does have connotations that while we may not know them or mean them, they do exist. And specifically, tribe and tribal in Western cultures often used to refer to things either Native American or African, primarily, which often those groups have been incredibly marginalized and dismissed. And so the word tribal has connotations that are problematic, much like the word savage. We don't call people savages anymore. That's not a thing we do. So tribal is not there, obviously. That's much, but it's much closer than maybe we would consider. So it's a conversation worth having. However, are we ever going to see Typal on a Magic card?
We're not going to see
I don't think
Typal.
so. And that's what Mark Rosewater says here.
I will say the interesting thing is, because this has been a conversation for, I would say probably since the middle of the pandemic, so about like 2 years or so, real heavy. And a lot of people I've encountered have already started moving to just saying theme deck, right? So it's like I have an elf theme deck or whatever.
Right.
Partly because you can also use it as I have a +1/+1 theme deck or whatever, right? And it sort of fits for everything. And I think that's why people were adopting it. So when I saw the news, I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to use the word, even though it is. The other thing, too, is that's an actual word. I think people thought it was something that's made up. That's actually a real part of the English language.
It's a real word.
But I'm probably still just going to use Typal. Yeah.
Oh, Typal. Yes.
Typal. Yeah, I think I'm still just going to use theme, though, because it's just ubiquitous and works for every deck I play.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it coming out. I mean, obviously, the usual knuckleheads came out of the woodwork and wanted to attack some people talking about it or whatever. But I think it's well-intentioned. Nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. You don't have to... All you have to do is just not say a word that you once said whenever problematic words arise. In this case, it's not problematic. It's just something that maybe we shouldn't print on Magic cards.
And it's also not a word we say a lot anyway.
Right.
That's the other thing. It's not like we have to change every article or every whatever. Like sometimes you just don't use the word for probably months playing Magic. So it's not that much of a surprise. It's easy to work into our lexicon, I guess.
Right, and I default that anyone who happened to run an elf tribal deck is not doing so to hurt anyone or to be hurtful. Just like, again, I'm trying to get Manland out. It's been it was in there a long time. Sure. It takes a minute to get it out of there. But very interesting. Some more interesting ideas came out from Chris Mooney, who on Twitter was asking some interesting questions, basically every single one of them had to do with what if we put a commandery thing in a standard set? It wouldn't matter in a standard set if something has, for example, if they print out a card with melee. In constructed, it means it just gets +1/+1 when it attacks, but it'd be stronger in multiplayer formats. And then there was another mechanic he asked about, which would essentially be unearth in standard versus otherwise. And the last one I thought was really cool, which is, let's say we printed a legendary vehicle with this can be your commander in a standard set, and limited constructed, it does nothing but be relevant commander. I think that's brilliant. I love that. I think it's neat. I think it's another any knob that you can tweak to make something cool and interesting and different and like splashy and oh my God, that's cool and different. Let's go. Like I say go for it. I don't see anything wrong with this.
Yeah, totally fine. I don't care if that sentence appears on a card. I think that, yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I'm largely the same way. I mean, if a card, I'd be more bothered if it did next to nothing in standard or limited, but did everything in commander, like when there's multiple opponents or something. That would bother me. But if it's in every other way functional with a small upside, but then also does something in commander, I'm okay with it. Sure. I mean, as long as we're not having to open junk to take care of commander in a non-commander product, I don't see what the problem would be.
Right, and to me, the finesse, like the design and what would be cool about it is to walk that line, right? To make it interesting, cool, and limited/constructed. But when you go to multiplayer formats, something changes or it interacts differently, but it's not a totally different experience on either side of the aisle. But that's what's cool about it. That's what should be cool about it, in my opinion, is you have something that could probably scale nicely, but also still make sense in 1v1. And
yeah, because that's not any different than right now, how we get cards that say for each opponent or deal however much damage to each opponent, right? You're only going to have one, but in commander games, they're going to be much better.
Absolutely. Let's move on here. Last little bit. I guess you gotta pour one out for E3. It's canceled through at least 2025.
It ain't coming back, dog. Like, you're talking about canceling 4 years in a row.
We're done here.
It ain't coming back.
That's fine. I think
that
SDCC
is going to have problems this year because of the writer's strike, so they're already going to be up against it. So
well, the studios aren't coming.
Yeah, none of them.
Speaking of SDCC, right? Like, Warner Brothers and all the big studios are not coming because
there's nobody to send.
Well, because also you don't have to do that anymore, right? Like there used to be, you had to gather, and there was the press there, and everyone. That was where the attention centers are. The attention centers are wherever the hell you want them to be these days.
But there is upside to that. That maybe, just maybe, they could focus on comic books this year. Just
now you're being weird. Now you're being weird.
Could be a thing. Could be a thing.
You're back to the red zone. I'm telling you. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I think that, we literally this is the second verse, same as the first. We are in a world that has changed since the pandemic and a world that has changed how it consumes media. Yeah. Events like this are less relevant and less useful, and things like paywall content are less relevant and less useful. And let's be honest, conventions are paywall content than they used to be.
E3 was already struggling, though, because it went from being an industry event to being like, okay, now we're going to do giveaways and have tickets and
like a weird
general
PAX.
Consumers can come. Right. Yeah. And then you got to the point that because of that, Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, they started doing their own shows like the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday leading up to it.
Right.
So there was nothing really to debut or show at E3 anymore. Like, even now, without E3 happening, they're all doing their own presentations, filling up auditoriums.
It becomes a festival.
Yeah.
I mean, and the Game Awards exist, and the summer thing that they're doing or whatever as well, which was kind of interesting. And so looking back in 2020 vision, it's clear that, honestly, E3 was lucky to be around as long as it was.
Sure.
Because those last few years were not necessary to exist, like, at all, which is crazy. Let's go ahead and turn the corner here to the finisher. The biggest news in internet news this week is that the original creators of one of YouTube's most popular channels ever are back at the helm. Ian Hecox?
I think it's Hecox.
And Anthony Padilla have brought back their brand Smosh Games after they sold it 7 years ago. The nostalgia of early YouTube has me in my feels, so tell me, what early Magic content stuff would you like to make a comeback, Ruben?
Well, one piece of old Magic video content that I really miss is Geek and Sundry's Spell Slingers, hosted by Day 9, where finally, Magic the Gathering had a piece of internet-streamed content that wasn't Commander.
For that little brief sliver of time.
We had a moment in time where people played 60-card decks.
It was incredible. Power Dragon?
You know, a long time ago, near the beginning of YouTube, there was this really cool program called The Magic Show. And I don't really know what happened to that guy.
Yeah. Fell off face of the earth.
That guy is just, where'd he go?
Faded into obscurity.
Just got old and, walked the earth. Well, let me tell you, one channel I really miss is our buddy Rhino at Young Mage MTG, who by this point, after all this time, is probably pushing middle-age Mage MTG. So.
Still making content. It's been a couple months, but go follow Young Mage MTG.
He deserves all the follows, man. That kid goes through a lot of stuff.
That ends another live episode of Magic Mike. Thanks for joining us here to discuss all things Magic. Thank you, Power Dragon.
Hey, it's always good to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thanks for hanging out. I love talking with you guys, and we'll see you next week.
You bet. As we move on here to our final slide, I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, Mana Traders, my co-host, Power Dragon, and Ruben Bressler, you guys, for watching and listening. Hope you support us at patreon.com/magicmics. Please follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online on our Discord, twitch.tv at Magic Mics, on Twitter at Magic Mics Cast, our Magic Mics subreddit, and like the Magic Mics page on Facebook. Or join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mics. Good night, everybody.